So good morning, everyone. Hello, thank you for joining and welcome to Module 5 of the UN Trust Funds training on project management. And today's session is on operations management and aspects of procurement, potential audit, human resources. So I'm going to share the presentation, which you should have received by email. You should have received the script, the presentation, and also our guidance documents, the handbook on operations and procurement. So thank you very much for joining this fifth part of our 10-part training. As I said, this session is on operations management, so that includes how to understand and apply the project cooperation agreement in terms of management of our human resources, operations, procurement, and preparation for a potential audit. So you may not be audited, but you may be audited, so we're going to explain why. So at the end of this session, you will hopefully understand the minimum requirements and standards for personnel working for your organization and the project directly, the importance of complying with the procurement rules and regulations of the Trust Fund and UN Women. And complementing this session, we have lots of guidance and operations to support you, including a guidance note on micro-purchasing in case you want to purchase smaller items under a certain threshold, a petty cash guidance on how to handle cash in your office, records management guidance that we talked about last time, and we also have guidance on procurement. Now, we understand that you already have, many of you, your own guidance, your own procedures. And if they do not deviate substantially from our guidance, then please just continue to use your own policies and procedures. But if you don't have your own policies and procedures in certain areas, we ask that you follow our guidance and policies. And we also ask that you double check and verify that your guidance and policies meet the standards of the UN. So the purpose of this session and the guidance is for you to cross-check against your own policies and procedures and just to double check that you meet our requirements, because that avoids any potential later when we do financial checks and potential audit. So in terms of your personnel, it states in the Project Cooperation Agreement under Article 4 that your organization is expected to ensure that your personnel meet the highest standards of qualification and technical and professional competence necessary for achievement of the project, and that decisions on employment related to the project are free from discrimination on the basis of race, religion or creed, ethnicity, national origin, gender, disabilities, or other factors. And of course, I'm sure that you put these in place, but it's always good to check that your recruitment procedures are free of discrimination and give the best possible chance for people to apply, because that is the fundamental principles of the United Nations. In terms of achieving the project, obviously it's context-based. You are recruiting local staff, you are recruiting staff within the realm of your project and your context. We do expect you to hire staff that you expect can achieve the job description that you've given them and have the best possible chance of helping you deliver the project. So of course, we're not expecting you to hire people, scientists, to complete your project, but we do expect you to have done a proper review of the CVs you've received and you've picked people for the project who can be expected to do the job. And very importantly, we expect that your personnel are free from conflict of interest relative to the project activities, and that your organization is fully responsible for all the services performed by your personnel, agents, and employees. What do we mean by conflict of interest? Well, that would mean on a simple basis, if perhaps your uncle has a business which supplies materials for NGOs, it might be a conflict of interest for you to offer business to your uncle and not be offering business elsewhere. So that would be a conflict of interest unless declared and it went through a fair process. Not offering jobs to friends on a very simple basis. There has to be a fair recruitment process and procurement process for everything. Furthermore, on personnel, it's important as you start up your project to ensure that the functions and responsibilities of your project are very strictly defined and set up to avoid major communication bottlenecks, conflicts of power and interest, forgotten or duplicated tasks, and wasted efforts. This might seem obvious, but we have seen projects where a lot of, for example, burden has been put on one project staff member to try and lead, coordinate, manage, and implement without much oversight. So it's good to review what staff you have in place for your project and ensure that you have a good chain of command in terms of your executive director overseeing a project coordinator, the project coordinator overseeing project staff, and that you routinely have regular meetings, discussions. It's recommended that you organize, if you haven't already, a startup workshop with your stakeholders, including other implementing partners that might be sub-granting, to be sure that all the duties are very clearly set out in your work plan, that there is a segregation of duties, there's no duplication of effort or activities, and that you're all learning and talking together and it's participatory. So, for example, having weekly or monthly meetings to discuss what is progress against your work plan and to ensure there's no misunderstanding or miscommunication. This should include the monitoring and evaluation personnel. It's always good to develop a monitoring and evaluation system that thoroughly includes monitoring of both project results and your project activities, that includes all primary stakeholders, and that you do get feedback, continuous feedback from all those involved in the project as regularly as possible. And I know it's now already 3 months for some of you into a project, so hopefully you've already done this. But if you haven't already, or it's been 3 months since your first meeting, how about setting up a meeting to check in to see how everyone is doing? So what do we mean by segregation of duties? This means it's extremely important to ensure there are an appropriate level of checks and balances within your organization to minimize the risk of error or fraud, or to help detect such occurrences. A proper internal control system should be in place and designed to provide assurance in regard to achievement of the following objectives. On operational matters, this should be in regard to the effectiveness and efficiency with which personnel approach the strategic and operating objectives of the project and the organization, including performance and results-oriented goals and safeguarding of resources. So who in charge in your organization is making sure and overseeing that there is an effective and efficient progress against your strategic goals, which is the work plan. On the financial side, you should have sufficient internal goals to ensure the physical safety and maintenance of your financial records and assets, including the preparation of financial statements and selected financial data. On the financial side, segregation of duties would include, for example, that the person preparing your financial accounts, your finance officer, is of course not the same person who would sign and certify and check the financial report at the end of the month or every 6 months, that you would have a separation of duty between those preparing the accounts and those signing off, overseeing and certifying the accounts. On compliance, do you have an internal control mechanism to ensure that everyone in your organization is complying with the regulations, rules, policies, and procedures that have been put in place to meet the needs of the organization. So, for example, on procurement, do you have anyone who spot checks and verifies that the procurement policies are being implemented in the correct way? So again, it should not be the same person who conducted recruitment for a personnel that then does a spot check and verifies that that HR person actually complied with the rules, that you would have occasional spot checks and verification that internal controls have been put in place. So always consider that within your organization. And those who are small organizations, this might be more challenging than others, but you can always come and speak to us at the UN Trust Fund about ways to manage this. Project management is the team that you decide. That could just be 2 of you, it could be 4 of you, it will depend. You could have a team of 15 on your specific UN Trust Fund project. That team is responsible for ensuring that all the proper supporting documentation is properly maintained and that everyone is aware and following and complying with that documentation. So does everyone in the project management team know and have to hand the annual work plan and the project document, and that includes the results framework? Is everyone aware of the project cooperation agreement that you've signed and the articles within it? If you do have weekly or monthly or routine meetings, do you do minutes of those meetings to ensure that everyone is on the same page and understands what action points? Does everyone on the project team know what your procurement policy is and is aware of your policy before they start recruiting consultants or other personnel? And that would be the same with any partners that you work with that you might be subgranting. Who is evaluating your implementing partners and ensuring that those that you subgrant to follow the same rules and procedures? Do you have a routine setup for field visits to go and monitor what's going on in perhaps project sites, for which you would do meeting minutes and project monitoring documentation? And finally, when you come to do your progress and financial reports, how will you ensure the project team make inputs into these, that they see the report, that they verify the report? So consider, although we're talking about documentation here, I'm just using this as an inroad and a way in to remind you about the importance of a project management team having to hand the project documentation, and everything is documented is a very good way to control your project and to make sure that it achieves what it needs to achieve. So moving on from internal controls, I'm now going to move on to procurement. So procurement is the process by which you might procure services from a vendor or a contractor. And most of you will have your own procurement procedures and policies, and we simply want to check that your policies and procedures and control mechanisms comply with the UN standards. This is both to help you manage your funds well and also to avoid any potential issues later in the day if you are audited or if your finances are verified. So to help you comply, we sent you a questionnaire which you should have all returned to your portfolio manager. And that procurement questionnaire should be able to help you assess whether you, just muting everyone, should be able to help you prepare for checking whether your procedures and policies comply. If you haven't completed that questionnaire yet, I encourage you to do so as soon as possible, because from that we will send you some suggestions for how you can comply. We might simply say, yes, your procurement guidance complies, as you will see on this slide. So this slide just shows the process. So right now you should have hopefully completed the procurement questionnaire and sent it to your portfolio manager. our staff here will check it and see if it complies with our procedures, in which case we would say, yes, you're fine, and we will tell you, yes, please continue following your procurement policies and procedures. Or we might find that some of your procedures do not comply, in which case we will ask you to comply with our guidelines, or you can adjust your own if you wish. So you should have already returned that. If not, please do so, and we will aim to get back to you within a few weeks or so on the findings. We have a procurement guidance, and procurement can be a complex activity, but there's 3 basic principles to help you. And on the slide, I'm showing you just a snapshot of our procurement guidelines, just to remind you that we do have all this guidance. So if you don't have your own rules, we have them in French, English, and Spanish. And there are 3 basic fundamental rules that you would have an effective composition. The organization needs to demonstrate there was an effective competition. So, for example, when you're hiring a consultant, buying equipment, or requiring services, that you do go out to competition and you ask for offers from contractors, and those contractors will provide you with their quotes, for example. So you will let all eligible potential contractors know a timely and adequate notification of the requirements, and give them an equal opportunity to tender, which is give you an offer for those goods and services. Then when you receive those tenders and quotes, you would conduct the process with fairness, integrity, and transparency. So your organization is responsible for protecting the integrity of the process and making sure it's fair, and you fairly treat all of those parties presenting bids, and that you make sure the process is open, and that it's complete, and you have accurate records of the review of the tenders. So if you do a review of each of the quotes, that you write down why you selected the one you did, and that you select the one that represents best value for money. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the cheapest. We're not saying you have to pick the cheapest. It means that you would pick the offer that represents the most advantageous combination of cost, quality, and sustainability. So perhaps you will be hiring a consultant. You may not necessarily pick the cheapest, because the cheapest offer may not be the most professional, or may not have the best references. You might go for the slightly expensive option if they have better references. And of course, it all depends on your budget. Don't forget, it's important to assess all offers. Personnel in charge of procurement management must assess all the offers and vendors with which business is conducted, to ensure that it's fair. So yes, take a look at our guidance, complete that procurement questionnaire, and we'll be in a much better position to check that your policies meet our guidance. In terms of procurement of equipment, your organization is required to provide an annual inventory of any equipment or assets purchased under the grant. You will be required to submit this annual inventory once a year in the grants management form system, and we will give you the spreadsheet, the format in which it should be delivered once a year. So we've covered procurement, and now we're going to move to audit. And we know you're just at the beginning of the project, but we find it's helpful to talk about audit now so that we can help you avoid an audit, or at least avoid an audit that might come out with negative findings. You may not be audited, you may be, and I'll explain the selection. Some projects are audited simply to mitigate the risk to the trust fund. It provides us with reasonable assurance that the organizations we fund are using the funds for the intended purpose, including what was agreed on in the project document. But we very much also hope it would help you, so don't be too scared of an audit. We've found that audits really help improve organizational operations because it allows you to have an external perspective and an outsider come in and review a professional, review weaknesses in your internal control framework. It makes you more credible and trustworthy to donors. So if you are audited and you get a clean audit, that's excellent ammunition, excellent evidence to show that your organization is a healthy, trustworthy organization. But of course, this depends on the opinion you get. So we're going to help you make sure you get a clean audit. So in terms of selection, you may not be selected for an audit. It's a risk-based selection. So what does that mean? Well, first, our auditors will select projects depending on the country. So obviously countries of higher risk, say Afghanistan, and those of the higher risk on the corruption index may be more likely to be audited. So if you know that your project is in a country that has a high level of known corruption, for example, it might be more likely that your project is audited. Secondly, is the level of expenditure. So if you've got $1 million project, it might be more likely than if you're a small grant, but that's not necessarily true because it's all about other risks too. But if you're operating in a very high-risk country in terms of political and financial risks, and your expenditure is at least $100,000, it's likely that you would be selected for audit. If you're in a low-risk country, the threshold is higher. So if you're in a low-risk country, it's more likely that you would be audited if you have a high-value project. Another way that we select audit is through your portfolio manager. This means that if we are receiving financial reports from you or progress reports that have errors, if we receive progress reports that are not very comprehensive, don't talk about the project sufficiently, if you have low financial delivery rates, unsatisfactory expense verification, then these are red flags, which means we might audit you. That's why it's so important that you do the thorough records management, because at your first progress report that will come next March for many of you, we will do a 100% check of your records against your expenditure accounts, and if there are a lot of errors, then that would be, you are more likely to be flagged for audit later down the line. So what is covered in the audit? If you are selected to audit, then the external auditors will come and they will only look at 1 year of your accounts. They would only look at 1 annual year. And you will be asked to submit all the financial reports and records and supporting documents to the auditor for that entire year. In some cases, we have audits that go over a year, but that is an exception. So usually it's for 1 year. Selection for audit normally happens around November, so that's now. Unless you're in a very high-risk country, it's unlikely that, because most of you are starting a new projects, unless you're already in one of these high-risk, high-amount countries, it's unlikely you'd be selected for audit yet because there's no red flags. But normally it would be November. So November next year, you might be selected. By December, the list is finalized and you will be informed whether you've been selected. And then the field visits, as in the visits to your office to check your accounts, would happen between February and mid-April. So as your projects have only just started, I really expect this not to happen for you until 2020. It's unlikely to happen in 2019 unless you're a very high-risk country. Audit reports are due by the end of April from the auditors. And you, of course, will have the opportunity to read a draft report. We would never finalize it without your opinion. You will see the draft report. You will have opportunity to provide further evidence, provide explanation before any audit report is finalized. Who does it? Well, it's the UN Women's designated external auditors. So they're not UN Women's staff. They're an external auditing company who are hired to perform the audit of the projects, and we coordinate it here at the Trust Fund with UN Women. So there is no need for you as an organization to commission this audit. You might do your own organizational audits, but this is different. If UN Women select you for an audit, we manage it here. You just need to be prepared. Likewise, the audit is paid for by us, and we've already budgeted for that in your grant. So we asked you to put a certain amount in your project budget, and that audit cost is a project expense, but we already topped up your grant to include that amount. And you will see, therefore, in your work plan that the audit line in your budget appears with UN Women as the responsible party. This amount will never be released to you. It will be kept in the Secretariat to settle any audit expenses. So you will see it in your work plan, but you won't be able to spend it or use it. It won't be released to you. It will only be used by us if you are audited. And if you are, you would then receive a letter to account for that money so you can record that expenditure. If you don't get audited, what happens? Well, nothing happens. If you're not selected, that budget line remains, but at the end of the project, the UN Women retains that money and it's a saving to UN Women. It's not reprogrammable. You cannot spend that money. You will not be allowed to redivert the audit money elsewhere. So what happens during and after the audit? When the auditors come, they check your records management, they check everything we've been talking about. They then issue an opinion on your financial reports, and they say whether their opinion is qualified or unqualified. And this is annoying technical. I find it quite confusing, the difference between qualified or unqualified. A qualified audit means that there's an error, there's a problem. So the qualified audit means that something needs to change in your procedures. Unqualified means everything's fine. It means we think that your financial records are sound and we have no qualifications, no concerns. So it's the qualified audit that is the concern, and it can lead to, in extreme cases, to termination of the grant if it's a very serious finding. So it means the auditors found your financial records and statements are not fairly and appropriately presented. You want to avoid this. And there are three possible consequences of that. One, you will need to prepare an action plan to address any findings in the audit. And this action plan should then be monitored by you and by the portfolio manager until it's resolved. Also, if you are in receipt of a qualified audit, you are likely to be audited again the following year. So if in 2020 you receive an unqualified audit, you're likely to be audited again later that year or in 2021. As well as the qualified or unqualified observation, there are two kinds of findings. You might have financial findings or management findings. Financial findings simply mean that there's a financial issue, and a management finding means there might be something to do with your operations, as we were talking about conflict of interest, internal controls. If you are unable to resolve any of these findings or explain them, this cost will be considered ineligible and we will ask for that money back. So if there is a financial finding that $5,000 was spent on something that did not meet our rules, then you would be asked to return that $5,000 to us. To help you prepare for the audit, we basically encourage you to just follow all the guidance that we're giving you. We ask you to make sure that you follow our guidance in detail. We have more guidance on audit if you want to hear about it. We have audit terms of reference if you want to find out what is likely to happen in an audit. And we also have an audit preparation checklist. So if you do come to have an audit, we do have further help and support. But in terms of avoiding audit completely and getting a clean audit, well, it's just everything we've been telling you. Make sure that you file your project records and expenses according to project activity. Records management is vital. Filing your records by project activity makes it much easier for you to find those documents if the auditor asks them. If you're not doing that, you might get a bit lost. It's easier to follow the financial reports, to check expenses if you're filing by project activity. If you do have a different system that's already working fine, then please continue to use it, but we have found it very helpful for some organizations. Always make sure that you are filing all your records and supporting documents in a timely manner as quickly so that it's all there, that you don't have to go back and start filing before the auditor gets there. Record keeping is key. Ensure you do have these internal controls we've been talking properly in place. It is not enough to have the rules and regulations. You need to be following them. So as I mentioned, is anyone in your organization spot checking, verifying, quality assuring that these internal controls are happening? So you have operations manuals that you've sent us, but who in your organization is double checking that these are being followed? The auditors will hold you to these manuals and organizational rules and regulations. If you're sub-granting to another organization, you are expected to monitor your partner's expenditure in the same way that they would have supporting documents for every expense. And you must record the funds going out to them as an advance and clear the advance based on the supporting documents. Do not include advances or commitments in the financial report. This is a common audit finding. Since the PCA states the financial report must be cash-based, you cannot report advances as expenses. So these are the best ways to get a good audit. The common problems we've seen in audit, just to warn you, and we're coming to the end of the presentation, by the way, just to keep you engaged. We're coming to the end of the presentation, so I just want to talk about a few more audit findings, just to you aware of what to avoid. Most of these are self-explanatory and already mentioned. Cut-off error, what does this mean? Well, cut-off error is just a fancy word for saying that we will, of course, not pay for any expenses that were incurred before the project began, say on 1st of September 2018, or after the project ends, say 30th of August 2021. So that means the cut-off date. The cut-off date is that 1st of September or before. And we have seen in audit reports problems with organizations charging to the trust fund expenses that were paid before the project started. So that's a common error. We also see common errors in terms of expenses double funding. So if you have another donor that is funding some of your projects, you cannot charge the same expense to both donors. This sounds like common sense, but it has happened, and the auditors will find it. Value-added tax. Do you pay value-added tax to your governments in your countries? In some countries, you are exempt, so you would pay for that, and then you would reclaim it, in which case you should not be reporting as an expense. You cannot claim VAT from the trust fund if you're actually exempt. You can only charge it to us if you're not exempt. Other errors we've seen are that advances are claimed as expenditure. As we mentioned before, do not include advances in your financial report. And expenses claimed but the activity is not taken, and as another flaw that we've seen. If the activity didn't happen, you can't report it as an expense. Finally, you must have a proof of payment for everything. The importance of records management and having receipts and verification cannot be understated. And an obvious one, obviously, if you have a contract with a contractor, you cannot then decide to pay them more over the contracted amount. So these are common audit findings. So we're telling you this so you can avoid them. Keep these in mind, share it with your staff who are involved, and watch out for any of these errors. And if you keep on top of this, I'm sure you will have a clean audit, an unqualified audit. And on the next slide 13, I'm just showing you an excerpt from a note from an auditor. This is just an example. To a large extent, we know that our organizations we fund, will always follow their own accounting rules and procedures. However, there are certain requirements which you must follow, and there have been a number of cases where this really hasn't been properly understood, which is why we're doing this session. So, for example, it's very clear in our project cooperation agreement that in our procedures for procurement of goods, you, the NGO, must ensure that when placing orders or awarding contracts, you must safeguard the principles of highest quality, economy, and efficiency in placing such orders on the basis of competitive quotations, bids, or proposals. In addition to conducting the processes necessary to adhere this condition, you are responsible for maintaining documentary evidence that shows that you went through this process and that you made the decision on the basis of a competitive process. And the most common finding from audits is that this documentation could not be produced. So document everything. So that's it. We've come to the end of the session. I hope that you found this helpful. I know that it's quite heavy, but it is intended to help us all avoid any potential problems when it comes to the financial reports potential for audit. And now I'm going to move to time for questions. Online, we will have quite a few, as before, we have, I'm going to take them off mute, we have Nadia, our Finance and Operations Analyst online, Tirilim, our Finance Analyst online also, and hopefully also one or two other people who can help, Mildred. So thank you very much for joining. Mildred or Nadia, do you want to add anything?
No, I think it was comprehensive. Unless participants have any questions, we are happy to answer them.
Yes, likewise. This is Mildred. Yes, likewise, Gemma.
Great. So now it's just a chance to ask questions. So please ask your questions in the chat box, and then we will read them aloud. And as before, if you can't think of a question now, that's fine. Don't feel that you have to stay online. You can always leave. And if you think of a question later, you can always email us. We're here. Portfolio managers are your primary source for any questions. Okay, so we have a question. So Anthony, it's asked privately, so I'm going to copy. Just a reminder, when you ask a question, there is an option to send it to everyone. So I'm just going to put that down. Hopefully Nadia and Mildred. So the questions come from Anthony. Hi, Anthony. He asks, what measures do the UN Trust Fund have in improving the capacity of grantees and sustainability? How about providing resources for improving manuals and staff training? Good question. And 2, do you have a threshold on account line limit? And 3, what if you don't agree with the auditor's findings? And finally, do you have a list of the high-risk countries? Mildred?
Yes. Hi, good morning all. This is Mildred Garcia, the Portfolio Manager for ECA and LAC. I will answer the second question and the third question. If we have thresholds on account line limits, I think you are referring to the maximum amount that you can spend by activity line. If you can please confirm that to answer that question. If you are referring to petty cash, there is a specific policy for petty cash and the threshold for that. So just if you can please clarify what are you referring to? If you're referring to the activity budget limit or if you're referring to petty cash. Um, with the auditors, if you don't agree with some of the auditors' finding, there is a period to provide comments and clarifications to the auditors. It's usually 2 weeks from the draft when the draft report is submitted to the grantee. And we do have a list of high-risk countries, and we can share that with you later on. On the first question, Gemma, I think this is more addressed to you. Hi, Gemma. Sorry.
I'm not. Sorry, yes, starting again. Yes, on the question one, Anthony, yes, every year we're trying to do more in terms of supporting organizations. In fact, we didn't used to have any of these guidance notes on records management, on procurement, or we didn't do the procurement questionnaire. So every year we're trying to do more. Certainly we can do more for the smaller organizations than the larger, because we have a commitment to helping, in particular, those of you who might be receiving under 150,000 and are a small organization. Please contact your portfolio manager if you're struggling to improve your manuals. And every year we do try and do more. We can do more sessions. So if after this you feel like you would like another session on anything specific in terms of records management, procurement, just let us know. Give us feedback. Mildred, I think Anthony has now clarified. He didn't mean the account code, not activity. I think, I'm not quite sure if I still... Account code, not activity. Oh, I'm not quite sure.
I think perhaps he's referring to certain accounts like audit, personnel, equipment, indirect costs. Those account lines or budget lines do have a threshold limit. So if you're referring to that, the answer is yes. Those three accounts, specifically audit, personnel, equipment, and indirect costs, and for smaller organizations, core funds, and self-care account line do have threshold limits. Nadia, would you like to add to that?
Well, yes, we have specific budget guidelines, so you can review them again in the extranet, which detail what are percentage ceilings for each budget category. And of course, there are our general guidelines to not exceed 20% of budgeted amounts for categories that have no percentage ceiling.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. So yes, after this session, we will re-share the budget guidelines, which have this budget ceilings for each specific line, and we will send you a list of the countries that are considered high risk and more likely to be audited. Okay. Any other questions? Mildred, maybe I did say something during the session about how if we're selecting projects for audit in November, how likely is it that any of the Cycle 21 are to be selected, or is that not possible to
No, it's
judge?
unlikely. It's
unlikely.
Yes.
Unlikely that any of your projects would be
yes.
selected for audit in 2019. It's more likely. And that's good because it means that we have a whole year to work with you in terms of checking your financial accounts and working with you at the financial report stage.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Hi, Emma. This problem, yeah. So I think he also asked about sustainability.
Oh, yes.
So on that, I would like to add points that we trust fund also gives recommendation letters for good grants, and we have many cases of that grantees we gave letters and could get grants from other donors. In addition, there is also a possibility of being selected for a second time based on performance. As to audit, we have cases when we don't agree with auditors. We have cases that we pushed back the auditor comments in coordination with grantees, and we could manage to help the grantees to get a better or a good audit at the end. So I just want to add this point.
Yes, thank you, Tiril. That was very helpful. Thank you for making those points. Just in case you couldn't, the line was a little bit difficult, so I'll just repeat. So Tiril was referring to Anthony's question on sustainability of organizations. Yes, so we can, at the end of close to the end of your project, we can write recommendation letters for you to other donors, reference letters. So on the basis of the efforts that you may have been making on improving, so if you are worried, you don't have any manuals and procedures in place, but over the 3 years with us, there's a high demonstration of adherence to financial rules and regulations, we can certainly be writing recommendation letters. Irrespective of that, if we have a successful project with you, we are very happy to write recommendations to help make sure that your project is sustainable. Also, Tiril mentioned that we normally we don't allow you to apply for funds again until 3 years after the project ends. So you end in 2021, you are not allowed to apply for funds until 2024. But we do have what we call the invitation-only window. Around 4 organizations a year selected according to criteria. We may invite you to apply for funding 1 year after your project ends. Again, that's on the basis of good, clean financial records and demonstration and evidence that your project can scale up in particular. So I hope that helps on evidence. And also Tiril mentioned that there have been cases that we have pushed back to auditors, and we don't always agree with the auditor's findings. So we're in this together. Okay, so Anthony's asked another question on do we anticipate UN Trust Fund visits and assessment on addition to the auditors? Yes, so we like to come and visit to monitor the project, to verify. It's more of a verification mission at least once during your project lifetime. Sometimes it's not been possible because we're a small team, but we very much hope that at least one person from the Trust Fund or one person from UN Women would visit your project in the lifetime of your project. These missions will either be on the basis of, sometimes it's about lessons learning and communications. We may find that your project has good opportunity to do a story, a communication story. Sometimes we come to visit because we want to verify activities are happening. Again, it's like a mini audit of our own. Or we may come if the evidence is showing that you are perhaps lacking capacity. Going back to Anthony's point, we have on occasion come to projects to give training again to the whole office. So we do hope to come and visit you at least once. And Mildred and Nadia, in particular, sometimes in Tiril come to do financial verification missions. So yes, expect to visit at least once during the project. We would give you a lot of notice, and we always have a terms of reference and guidance. And the visits are only usually about 2 to 3 days maximum. So we have another question from Association Enical. Thank you. That was sent privately, so I'm just sending it to everyone. As part of the project, we prioritize procedures of the Trust Fund compared to local procedures. No, not necessarily. Do you want to answer that, Mildred?
So I think you are referring to procurement process?
Yeah, probably.
Yes. So as Gemma shared during the presentation, we will do a procurement assessment and we will review the capacity of the organization and if your procedures and policies align with the UN Trust Fund rules and regulations. And based on that assessment, we will give specific recommendations to the organization. So that's going to happen in the next week or so. We will share this information with you. If your policies do not align with our policies, you will have to comply with our rules and regulations, meaning that you will have to follow our procurement guidelines. I hope that answers, and if the operations teams can add something, please do so.
Yes, I would like to reiterate that you're welcome to already review our guidelines on the extranet. We have 4 guidelines: procurement guidelines, micro-purchasing guidelines, petty cash guidelines, and records management guidelines. So these are the guidelines of UN Women, and so if your own internal guidelines are even stricter than ours, you can feel free to follow your organizational guidelines. But if on opposite they do not comply with the UN Women, then you would have to follow ours.
And just to add to Nadia's comment, like I think I mentioned before, but we are due to send our comments on the assessment by November 23rd or so, in that week, that Friday. So do expect an email from your portfolio manager on this assessment and the next steps. Yes, that's it.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks, Anthony. Yes, we're all in this together, so we all get audited. We have our own, we have the own donors breathing on our neck in terms of financial accounts. So so we do understand the pain of some of these processes, but hopefully, all together, we're all in this to account to basically the beneficiaries and the people that we're helping. So everything we do in terms of due diligence means that as much effort can be made to actually help women and girls and the children that we're helping in our country. So the effort is not, we're not trying to overmanage the process, but these rules have come into place to ensure that we are achieving value for money. Great. Well, it seems that the questions are slowing down. So I'll just give you a minute to decide if you have a question. And if not, we will sign off. Next week's session is on ethics and safety. So that will be focused on ethics and safety within monitoring and evaluation activities and project activities. And also we're looking at issues of protecting your own staff as well as beneficiaries from any safety risks. So the documents will come on that soon. Hopefully you've all received emails from your portfolio managers setting out the steps that you've been asked to take over the last few months, including the procurement questionnaire. So if you have not yet completed that questionnaire, we encourage you to do so. And as I mentioned, if you want any further guidance or further sessions on any of the topics we've covered, just ask. You can write to me or you can write to your portfolio managers requesting additional sessions and guidance on any of the topics. And ask questions at any time. Thank you. Oh, final question. So there's a question from Cambodia. The auditor firm that you selected is from an international company. Shall it still be affected to the accounting standards of each country? Mildred?
Yes, the auditors selected at the moment by UN Women are from it's a company, international company called Moore Stevens, and they perform the audit based on the international accounting policies. And we can share more of this information with you prior to the audit process if you are selected for audit, and also share some questions in regards to the audit so you can be more prepared.
Thank you. Yes, so in that case, yes, they would follow the international accounting standards, but obviously that's where differences can perhaps lie in terms of audit findings. If there is a specific national accounting standard that you were following, and the international standards don't necessarily match up, then that would always be something that could be discussed. I think there have been cases where national rules and standards, obviously you as an NGO have to follow your national accounting standards. But
yes,
in most countries, national standards do follow the international.
Yes, but also bear in mind that the company also contracts local auditors to perform the audit. Although it's an international company, they have collaboration. They collaborate with national auditors. So then the auditors are fully familiar with the national context and rules and regulations.
Great, thank you very much, Mildred.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. As we've mentioned a few times, we do have this grantee space, extranet space, which you should have all received an invitation to, which does have we're just uploading a lot of the guidelines, but we'll have all the guidelines. I hope you all have access to that. If not, let me know or let your portfolio manager know, because all the guidance will be there. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great week, and wishing you and all your teams the best, and look forward to seeing you again or your colleagues next week at the next session on ethics and safety. So thank you very much for joining. Thanks for your patience with our rules and regulations and requirements, and speak to you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Feel free to send, if you think of a question, just email us. Thank you, everyone. Bye.